This song's called Have a Little Faith. Just seeing what it sounds like to you guys.
Drew was our family rock star. He was larger than life. It wasn't fair to be Drew. He was beautiful. He was smart. He had a 160 IQ. He was an Abercrombie model.
So many people worry about tomorrow. What about today? Things we can't afford, so all we do is borrow. Who said to live this way? Oh, have a little faith in things you cannot explain. They don't need.
When he was 11 years old, he was homeschooled, and he was collegiate level in 21 of 22 categories on a standardized test. And we were just running around with tennis tournaments and swimming matches with this guy, and he was way ahead of it in terms of standardized testing. There's a tendency of bereaved parents to deify their kids. That's not the case with Drew. He was a sinner like the rest of us, and so much so that anytime there was an altar call, he'd go up every time just to make sure. So I don't have to worry about his salvation. I know he's with the Lord, but he put up his fair share of having fun. Drew wasn't aware that I was molding him into being my own mini-me with a comb over and everything else until he got to maybe 7th grade. And then he's like, oh, we put him back in school because we couldn't handle the kids at that point. Him and his younger brother were really running the show. So we put him back in a Catholic grade school, and he discovered his own stride, who he was. One time he was asked by one of the priests, Father John, to come up, and Father John had noticed Drew was really popular with everybody in school. And he said, Drew, what is your secret? He goes, well, I'm the same to everybody, the same to the athletes, the jocks, the brainiacs, and the losers. And so some of these kids came up to him and said, Drew, am I a loser? Am I a loser? He realized he'd slipped up a little bit there. But what happened in terms of a change, in terms of his introduction to drugs and alcohol, was one of the first times we let him go on a overnight trip to Madison, Wisconsin. I believe it was for a youth group. Somebody there introduced him to cough syrup. And he came back talking, kind of walking slow and kind of hip. And he talked about the wild ride that he just had in Madison. He told me that somebody had shared some cough medicine with him, and he liked it. Naturally, I was very apprehensive about that. There's a family history of alcoholism in our family, and including myself, and I didn't want him to go down that path. So it was tough. It was really hard. We had, I think, a very open relationship. Every Tuesday, we'd have something called special breakfast. We'd go out, and no holds barred. He'd tell me what's going on in his life. I'd tell him what's going on in my life. We have a spiritual focus on that. We talk about the book of Proverbs and learning from that. And I'd pick up quite a bit from him. But, for what was tough about Drew is he always told me, he maintained to the day he died, I was his hero. And it was really, really hard to lose that relationship. And then Drew, in high school, had friends that introduced him to marijuana. They're really good people. They weren't susceptible to addiction like Drew was. I remember Drew and I writing a book together called 1001 Great Comebacks to Peer Pressure, and how to put down people and take the offensive so that you could talk in a way that gave you the upper hand, you the zinger, but a prepared zinger, to come back with somebody trying to push drugs or alcohol on you. And I remember dropping Drew off at a friend's house, and he's saying, oh, Dad, that's a really good comeback. That's great. I'm going to go out here with Eric, his friend, And he later told me that they were just going off and smoking some weed and, doing a sleepover at Eric's house. This at that point, freshman, sophomore year, it was out of a parent's control as much as you'd want to believe that you could control that. I think it's a pipe dream. He got out of high school. I think it was very hard for Drew that our family went through divorce when he was a senior in high school. By that point, he had kind of hit his own stride. He was runner-up for class president, I remember. But towards his junior year, I don't think he didn't qualify for the tennis team senior year because there was a problem with alcohol and getting caught with friends that disqualified him from playing tennis his senior year. When I was separated, living in a different house, Jack was down south with his mom, and he called me, goes, "There's a problem at the house and you need to check on Drew." And I'd go there, and I walked into the house, and there's like 20 bodies lying all over the house that I raised them in after a long party. And I meandered my way through the house in shock, coming across all these kids sleeping all over the place. And I finally made it up to Jack's room, and Drew was on the bed, passed out. And I sat down with utter disgust, staring at him. And he woke up and he saw me and he laughed. I said, "What's so funny?" He goes, "I always wondered what the facial expression would be on you once you discovered what I was up to." I said, "Look, you've got till noon to clean this place up. I cannot believe what you just pulled off here." And he had done that several times. If cops would show up at the house, he'd close the curtains, he'd know his rights, and he'd be able to talk his way out of it. He made Ferris Bueller look like a rookie in terms of the way he was able to deal with people. He owned them very, very fast, and he was mostly sincere, but he knew how to get his way and be persuasive. So yeah, he got into his 20s. He had a sports injury, and he was wrestling a friend that really aggravated it in college, and he was put on Percocet, and he liked it. He liked opiates. I think the one that really tripped him up was OxyContin, and it was a favorite of the pharma industry. And he even shared with me later on that he liked it before they made it time delayed. So he stuck with OxyContin, and when the prescription ran out, he sought it through illicit means and was able to get it through some family members. At that point, Tamara, his mother, had remarried, and I think Drew sought to pay for it with her new husband. I think he illegally forged some checks to pay for it. I think he ran up a bill of like $700. And when he got caught, he called me and said, "I'm in trouble." And I said, "What's going on?" And he said, "I fell into this habit. I like these pills. The first time I ever heard about it, it was OxyContin. It had forced him to basically throw out his moral code and take from this guy that he may or may not have respected. It was the new husband of his mom." And I said, "All right, well, we got to fix it with Jamie," was the guy's name. "But, more importantly, we got to deal with your addiction. We got to get rid of that." And I started looking into it, and I saw really, really bad things happening in terms of overdoses. And this was probably 2011, 12. He had interned for me, I believe in the summer of 2011. And I saw that this epidemic was rolling a lot of people, like in the tens of thousands. And I was not getting a good vibe that his odds of recovery were good. I remember he called me and said, I got some bad news for you. I'm like, what? He goes, I just heard that my odds of recovery are 2%. And I thought, are you kidding me? He said, yeah, people get on opiates, their odds of recovery realistically boil down to 2%. And I was like very devastated when I heard that. I remember going to an Al-Anon meeting with my wife, Christine, and we were sitting there, and a guy told us, he said, addiction is an avalanche, and it will take out everything in its path. Everything. He said, my sister's 40 years old. She's been an absolute drag on the family. She's completely caught up in her addiction. And, she never got well. And Drew was different. He had so much potential. He ended up graduating from college. He graduated from the University of Milwaukee, University of Wisconsin, Milwaukee, and UWM. And he had gone and studied in Australia as part of that. He had done quite a bit in terms of his little adventurous life. He'd gone scuba diving off Hawaii's coral reef. He went mountain climbing in New Zealand. He studied in Australia. He lived very, very large in terms of his ability to get around, to travel. He loved to go snowboarding in Colorado, and he wanted to travel. He'd write songs about it, and he wanted to get out and see the world. I had remarried, and I'd moved to Michigan. I had Drew with me for one summer. He lived with us, and he interned. And yeah, when he showed up, I didn't recognize his behavior. He had taken a train in, and I think he had come to work with me to kind of dry out, to get off and away from the drugs. And I didn't. His personality wasn't in sync with his normal huge self-confidence and his charmingness and his ability to get going. I remember one time he fell onto the floor and he said, my stomach's hurting. It was in our kitchen on Tequesta in West Bloomfield. And we're like, this is really strange. And he seemed agitated. And I think he was going through withdrawals of getting off of the opiates. I remember it was a sad moment when he graduated from college. I came and we celebrated it, and he showed me where he had stayed with his mother and her husband, Jamie, and he said, see that room up there, Dad? And I said, yeah. He goes, that's my bedroom. He goes, I've suffered more than you'll ever want to know in that room from withdrawals, from sweating, from struggling, from going without. He goes, withdrawal is hell, and that's where I did it. And I felt so terrible for him and wanted so badly for him to shake it and recover and return to being Drew. When he came and stayed with me and interned that summer, right away, I knew as soon as he was coming in, I called his cousin, Devin. I said, I don't recognize Drew right now. He's not himself. And it's a red flag to anybody with somebody who's in active addiction. They try to act normal, but they're just a little off. And I believe he had come to straighten out and get away from using opiates or the environment where he was in. He had a girlfriend there they really liked, named Allie, and I think he really missed her. Ultimately, he went back to be with Allie, but he stuck it out with me as an intern for the summer. And he was sad. He would walk my dog, Duke, on the golf course. We lived on a golf course at the time. And he said, I would just walk Duke and just say, maybe tomorrow will be a better day. And I didn't know why he was so sad, but he didn't have his friends around him. He was in a new place in Michigan. He really couldn't open up to me about what he was really struggling with, which was, I think, withdrawals from opiates. And he was very big. He told me, and he was right again, but Drew was always proved right. He goes, marijuana is going to open up and it's going to sweep the nation and it's going to be legal everywhere. And this is before it was legal anywhere. And he was 100% right about that. I said, alcohol's legal too. Doesn't mean it's okay for me or any other alcoholic to drink. So we had a tough night. We went down to a Mexican restaurant and he was pushing my buttons, talking about areas where drugs were going to be legal. And we were down to Mexican Village in Detroit, and it was a tough night because I knew he was going to shake this job and go back kind of early from the internship that I had for him that summer. I had this company called Detroit Digital and a company that I launched kind of with Drew called godclick.com. And I regret telling him that I was disgusted. I used the word disgusted, that he would throw away this opportunity for business just to run back to this gal. But I later understood it, and it was really, really tough. When I took him to the airport, we knew it was his final night in our house, and I took him to the airport. Even though him and I were bumping heads, we still had this thing, how about a hug? We still forced ourselves to hug each other, and I praise God for that. It kept our relationship going. He later wrote me a letter about what he was really struggling with and how sensitive his spirit was to any criticism coming from me, and how I was his hero, and how everything that if I said anything negative to him, it really, really hurt him. And I was, he wrote that to me on my 50th birthday, and I didn't find that letter until after he passed away.
Even though I should have been forsaken, left to die. Now I'm begging on my knees, asking why you come back for someone as little and as small as me, in a world filled with mystery. That's just faith.
We had an intervention for Drew. It was planned. It was I had let my entire family know about it. Ultimately, nobody showed up for it but me. It was a phone-in intervention. I drove to Milwaukee. He was there at his mother's place. I had my brothers and sisters get ready for a conference call, and they hopped on the phone. And on the given day, I went and saw him the night before. He was working at this restaurant called Imami Moto, and it was a high-end restaurant, and he was having a good time being a server, and he was doing well. And I went and visited him. I said, Drew, we're going to have a phone call here. I've got the family on the phone. And he started hearing from everybody on the phone. And he said, what is this? And my sister Joanne said, this is an intervention. And nobody was too scripted on what we were doing, but he hung up the phone. He says, okay, I thought we were going to go have a nice day, father-son stuff, walk in the park, play some Frisbee, walk around, do some things. This is a whole setup for me. And he was upset, like a lot of people can be during an intervention, like I have been during a surprise intervention. And he we eventually, it came to brass tacks. And my ultimate weapon with him was I ended up dropping a lot of F-bombs on him. I guess I'm ashamed to say, I don't endorse swearing, and telling him to go ahead and die because you're going to anyway. And you're screwing this whole family out of you. So go grab your drugs and I'm out of here. And I left. It was an act. It was pretending to do the walk away. He knew that I had gotten his attention, and he grabbed his brother and he said, "Do you really think I should go to this rehab place, Jack?" And Jack said, "Yeah, I'm going to call in the ultimate card they had going with them the whole life, the brotherly love card." Jack said, "Brotherly love, I need you to go to this." And Drew said, "All right, Jack, for brotherly love, I'll do it." And so he went to Rosecrans in Illinois. He got well. He got completely clean. And for a halfway house, which is the extension, decided to go to sunny, beautiful Florida in Fort Lauderdale because that seemed about the right place to go from the winters of Illinois. And so I couldn't agree with him more. He found a great place, talked us into it. We're like, yeah, let's go down there. He went down there. He was doing well. He was staying clean. He eventually got a job at Abercrombie. He had some waiting jobs, and he was doing great. And he went on, and he did pretty well. He may have relapsed once. I'm not sure of all the details because he was living on his own and self-sufficiently in Florida. And I told him I was coming down to Florida to hang out with a bunch of these. I belong to this group called the CEO Group, and I'd like to hang out with him for the weekend. And I went down, and he was there with a couple friends, Erwin and Flavia, who are now married, I believe, with children. And I booked a place at the Gaylord Resort in Orlando. And I just said, this is going to be a weekend. I'm going to spoil the crap out of my kid. And I went down there, and we stayed at this beautiful resort with all these fun things to do at the resort. And we were going to go to Disney World and have a great time. And we did. We had the most spectacular time, days together. The Friday, the Saturday, the Sunday. Finally, it was Super Bowl Sunday. It was our last night together. He grabbed a guitar and impromptu played this song called "You Gotta Have Faith." And he played it in front of everybody. I videotaped it. It was a beautiful song, off the cuff. And we were all like, wow, that's really a profound song. Talking about you have to have faith. It's a bridge across the gate. It's the reason for which I'm living. It's all about faith type of thing. And it was beautiful. And it was the best night ever. And it was almost like God knew that was our last time together. So we were that night, Super Bowl Sunday. We had a meeting together. And we had just an unbelievable time at this place called Swan Park. And I dropped him off, and he was doing well. And I sent him, I published the calendar. I sent it down to him. I published these cards for him because you got to have a card to give out. I gave that to him. I bought his domain called drewswan.com. He didn't want it. And then he called me back and he says, "You know what, on second thought, I think I'll take that domain." And I told him, "Have you been there lately?" Because I already had bought it for him and forwarded it to his blog site. And that was a special moment. He goes, "You already got it?" And it was great. And but then there was this 2-week period which I didn't hear much from him. And what had happened is he went down to Miami. He went to a rave, and he went with a friend. And somehow at this rave, he got what was called a Molly, which is like ecstasy. And he took it and, had a night of whatever, tripping on Molly. And the next day he told his friend, he goes, "That can never happen to me again. I'm a very serious addict. I can't go near anything like that." And tried to clean up his act. And I talked to him on Easter Sunday, March 31st. 2013, and I hadn't talked to him in a while. I said, Drew, what's going on? He said, Trey Burke is going on to the Final Four. It was our same Michigan team we'd watched, and we'd just gotten into the Final Four, we as Michigan fans. And I said, Drew, I miss you. I haven't heard from you in a while. He goes, I've been really busy, Dad. And it didn't sound right to me, but it was Easter Sunday. He was with a good family. He sounded okay. The next day, he blew a call into his brother, Jack, who had a really significant, meaningful 45-minute conversation with him. And the last phone call he made was the next day to his mother, and he said, I got to get back on track. I'm not on track right now, and I need to get back on track. And because he really was living a disciplined life with structure and accountability, and he was volunteering at his church. And, we'd had him back for a year and a half. He was doing well, but this relapse took him out. So he took an unprescribed pill from his roommate at this, I think it was a 3-quarter house. It was in Fort Lauderdale. And he was acting strange with his friend Rico. They were looking for apartments that day. And it was April 3rd, 2013. And he was acting woozy, and he had given some real red flags that he was actually experiencing an overdose. His eyes were dilated. He wasn't quick. He had actually fallen asleep going over some of the apartment watching that they were trying to find places to live. And so what happened is, Rico, he said, I just need to, sleep this off and, take me home. And it was towards dusk, and Rico drove him back to his place. And he said, Drew, something's wrong with you. What's going on? Because he was fumbling for his computer. He goes, no, I'm fine. And he walked into his house, and Rico was still suspicious something was going on. And he said, Drew, are you sure you're okay? And Drew had turned his back to him and held up his laptop and just gave him the thumbs up. And he walked into his house. We later found out that he had staggered into the house, fallen on his face, chipped his tooth. There was blood on the floor. He got into bed, he laid down, and he died. He died there because what happens is opiates shut down your automatic breathing in the back stem of your brain. That's what kills people. That's where overdoses and poisonings come from. And he stopped breathing and turned blue and died right there in his bed. And the next day, April 4th, Rico couldn't get a hold of him. Nobody could get a hold of him. He didn't show up at work. He had other places that he was accountable for. He was very active in the recovery community. Nobody was answering. Rico, having dropped him off, very well knew that something could be drastically wrong, and they busted into his room. He was gone. He had been gone for a while. He called, he sent a message on Facebook to Drew's brother, my son Jack. Something's very wrong with Drew. You need to call me right away. This was, I believe, Irwin. Jack called him and said, what's going on? What's going on? He goes, Drew's gone. Jack, Drew's passed away. There's a bunch of paramedics in his room right now, and he's not coming back. Jack's like, give him chest compressions, do this and that, because he had medical training at the time. And they were like, no, Drew, it's too late. He's gone. And so Jack calls me. It's 12:30 at night, and the phone rings, and I see it's Jack, and I blow it off because I'm sleeping. And then it rings again. And my wife says, that's not good. You need to pick that up. So I picked it up, and Jack blurts into the phone, Dad, are you sitting down? I said, no, I'm sleeping, but I need you to be sitting down right now. I said, okay. So I got out of bed, and I sat up, and I knew something bad was coming, but I still wasn't ready for it. And I said, okay, I'm sitting down now, Jack. He said, Drew's dead. My immediate thought was, then he's in a lot of trouble, because I've been after him about using his stuff. I wasn't thinking about dead. And it took just a minute because I was waking up to sink in. And when it did, I screamed bloody murder. It had to be really, really bad for my wife to hear all this. My sister was in the area at the time. She was ready to get on a cruise line. I called down and I said, I want you to see his body taken out of the house. I want you to be with him when they remove him. I don't want anybody touching him without a family member there. And she went down, God bless Joanne, and was there and got his wallet and his effects and brought them up to Michigan. 3 days later, I think she must have blown off her cruise. Gave me his wallet, had $300 in it. That was Jack's inheritance. He still had $3 left on the card I'd given him for Christmas for Dunkin' Donuts. And I went outside again and just flipped off the heavens. I was so mad that God would allow this to happen to me. And it was a long recovery from being a bereaved parent and looking at the hopelessness and despair and the brokenness that comes from losing someone like that. At his funeral, I said, I hurt in places that I didn't know I even had places. I always consider myself a little surfacey, a little bit of a shallow person. He proved to me I'm not shallow, because where he took me and gutted me were places that I didn't even know I had. But I was drained of the very blood in my system, in my soul, and my spirit. And I remember sitting in the bathtub wailing, just playing Michael Jackson music, Gone Too Soon, and waiting to get the funeral done and dealing with all the other crap that you have to deal with family members. Hey, when's it going to be? Like, when are they shipping his body up? And I was living in a surreal world. Life just didn't matter anymore to me at all. I remember being with my CEO group later on when we would get together, and they're like, Greg, you're a little out of it. What's going on? I said, I'll tell you what's going on. I don't give a damn about anything. Okay? I lost my number one. And there's a Christian group, they're like, that was Steve Strang said, that was the first time we heard anyone swear in our group. I don't give a damn. That was this big word that his poor virgin ears had heard. I'm like, okay. Fortunately, at that time, I was with Dr. Elvita King. She saw what was going on with me, and she kind of adopted me into her family and was that nurturing really presence that I needed, that understanding. And we just meandered through. My family really didn't understand at all what was going on, nor did they follow up really a whole lot. It's not their problem. I think the bereaved parent is a little bit too broken for anybody to want to touch. I'm in recovery. I didn't use again until I developed cluster headaches much later. The type of pain you get from the bereavement is so numbing. There's not a drug or a drink in the world that could touch how you felt. There's nothing that could even come close to it. So, but it was in 2018, I convinced my wife to run for Congress on the issue of the opioid epidemic. And we made a big splash. We eventually shook down Paul Ryan's team for $6 billion, which was funneled into the State of the Union address because we had a megaphone to a very important state to the Republican Party, which was Michigan. My father-in-law was a famous newscaster named Bill Bonds. They put us on the air immediately when they knew Bill Bonds' daughter was running for Congress. We were in the newspaper on the air, and we had the attention of that. And then what happened is we eventually made it to, after that $6 billion was released, they ran public service announcements. Deaths in the United States took a little bit of a dip in 2018. And then fentanyl came back in 2019 really strong because poppies and opioids took a back seat because they had to be grown. Fentanyl was synthetically produced, It really started strong. They were measuring it when Drew died. They weren't even measuring it 2013. But by 2019, it started in earnest. And since 2019, there have been 375,000 Americans, mostly young, mostly from fentanyl, who've died. So now I'm doing a much better. Fortunately, I'm in the solution. I didn't think that life was going to be fun anymore. Life tasted like cardboard after my mother passed away, and life tasted like gravel after Drew passed away. And somehow my business held on for many years after that. But it wasn't until I got a taste of it when we ran for Congress on the opioid issue that if I can get involved in the solution, that can be my therapy, my fix, my medicine that I desperately needed. There's an anger for a bereaved parent. There's an anger of being robbed, and they want a culprit, and they want to get even. There's a revenge factor, and they don't want their kid's life to be over. They want it to keep mattering. My kid's life matters, and that's every single bereaved parent. They innately are in a bit of a denial stage, a bit of an anger stage, and there's a rage that is underneath the surface that is a cauldron so powerful that if it's harnessed the right way and used the right way, it can be very much used for the good. A man named Snodgrass, a professor, wrote an article, and he said bereaved parents are a force of nature when it comes to getting things done legislatively, and that's true. We can get things done that normal people who don't care as much just can't pull off. We can get people out of our way. So I got involved in the solution, and it was about a year ago that we realized that we can't beat what's coming from the Far East in terms of the fentanyl precursors. We can't beat the fact that criminal drug networks are pressing this stuff and getting it throughout the United States. It's ubiquitous. It's available all around high schools, all around America, with emojis that indicate it's a drug dealer. And it's all a lie. It's being sold as Percocet, Xanax, Adderall, and OxyContin. And when kids hear those brand names, they hear Disney, Nike, McDonald's, brands that they trust. And it's not true. This is a vulnerable population. They're naive, and they think they're smarter than their parents. They can order it up to their house like DoorDash. And they can say, Mom and Dad, I got it. It's my late night food. It's their drugs, and it's not even the drugs they ordered. It's poison. And they take this stuff, and they wake up dead. Their parents come in, shake their leg, discover that it's cold, and collapse. That's pretty much the most common response I get from parents. So, I'm doing well now because I stay focused on the solution. I let Drew's life, who at one point had a prophecy over him, when he was very, very young, a lady walked up unprompted and unsolicited and said, "This child is going to be used mightily of the Lord." And I've always believed it. Her name was Ruth Kempkin. And I've always believed that about Drew. And he always was grateful. There was a prophecy over his life that he was going to be used mightily of the Lord. And he's just the tip of the spear that pushed me and a bunch of my comrades into co-founding Fentanyl Fathers to take our bereavement and channel it into something positive, which is giving kids the heads up they deserve to know that they're being lied to and fooled into dying. And there's nothing in terms of second place that deserves to be compared with fentanyl. It's fentanyl and fentanyl alone that is killing the snot out of people in decathousands numbers. 110,000 overdoses last year, 75% of that fentanyl. So it's not a niche problem, it's America's number one problem. And everybody agrees that, oh yeah, the high schoolers absolutely deserve a heads up. Yet no one, until this year, 2023, have people taken it is serious enough to be responsible for it. Once a gal like Melanie Ramos dies in a bathroom stall on school property, San Diego County gets together, mandates fentanyl awareness. Not long ago, the governor of California signed it into law that mandating fentanyl education. New York has followed. It's a bipartisan issue. I applaud California and New York for being the first to step up. We have a lot of inroads in Florida where we have now unlimited demand for Fentanyl Fathers to come to their school. And in terms of the talent pool, we need bereaved parents to tell this story. And bereaved parents are ubiquitous as well. As I mentioned, since 2019, there's 750,000 bereaved parents in the United States. They all want their kids' life to matter. They're not all public speakers. That's even more. That's even better. We have a simple program for them to come in and tell their story and make kids aware about the dangers of fentanyl. Give them the heads up. When we leave an assembly after 45 minutes, these kids are more likely to drink gasoline. This should be mandated in every single school in America, and kids should be aware of it. I predict a year from today, 2 years from today, it will be. It will be part of the core curriculum of every high school. It's too serious. It's, to put in perspective, COVID under the age of 30 killed all in 6,700 young people under the age of 30. You've heard about COVID. I've heard about COVID. Everybody's heard about COVID till they're blue in the face. They've heard about the vaccine. They've heard about this, that. 6,700. Compare that to 110,000. You can throw in Vietnam. You can throw in global plane crashes since 2006. You can throw in all childhood cancer deaths last year, 6,000 plus. You can throw in 10,000 drunk driving deaths. You can throw in 9/11. Add it all up, it still comes up shy of 100,000 deaths. Fentanyl is at 110,000. Nobody is in the league of fentanyl. That's why it is urgent, important now, and there's no time to waste. And if you're complicit, if you're a school administrator or a principal or a governing body who's complicit in the ignorance of these kids, that blood is on your head. Plain and simple. You are responsible for letting these kids know. We're doing our part to scale it as best we can to the most targeted, vulnerable population, which are high schoolers. But it's really appropriate for middle schoolers. By the time these guys get into college, they're on their own. They can order this stuff up, and the majority of them are dropping in their early 20s, 19, 20. 21 is the sweet spot for fentanyl deaths, but it's hitting a lot of high schoolers as well.